Hey guys, it's Dr. Bickling from Own It Dental. As always, here's my contact information if you need to get a hold of me. And if you guys are enjoying these videos, please do hit that thumbs up button, that like button. It's right down below, it's right there. It only takes you a second and it'll prevent me from chasing you down like a predator. Speaking of predators, today we're going to talk about the predator-prey equilibrium cycle and how it applies to your business. So let's dig into it. All right, so today we're going to talk about the predator-prey equilibrium cycle. You know, when I was in high school, I learned about this, with wolves eating, rabbits and things like that, and how the populations of each of those animals vary over time. Today we have an example of a lynx, chasing down a rabbit here. And I'm going to dig into it a little bit and tell you what it's all about. And then we're going to see how does this apply to your business and what can we do to not fall into this cycle for the rest of our careers. All right, so here's a little data that is brought up here between the populations of hare and lynx, so rabbits and wildcats, right? And so, the blue is the rabbit population and the orange is the lynx population. And you see, it starts out with the lynx population's a little more than the rabbits. And so, but the lynx start eating the rabbits, right? And then they start populating and offspring and living a longer life, but unfortunately the more lynx that they are and the longer they live, the more the rabbits they eat and the population of the rabbits starts to decline. Well, now the lynx's food source is on the decline, so of course the lynx don't live as long, they can't have as many babies and so on and so forth, so the population of the lynx starts to decline. And so now that the population of the lynx is low, now there's very few predators to eat the rabbits. So you see the population of the rabbits starts to increase, right? And so now the rabbits are living happy. They're having offspring, breeding like rabbits, right? And they're happy, and there's very few predators. But now that there's very few predators and there's a lot of food, these predators have more than enough food, so they start to live longer and have more babies, and their population starts to grow. And at a certain point, once that population gets high enough, they start eating up all the rabbits, and the population of the rabbits starts to decline. And this just keeps going on and on, over and over and over again, the predator-prey equilibrium cycle, where the population of the prey skyrockets due to a decrease in the population of the predators, and so on and so forth. The predator population follows, and it's just never-ending cycle of increasing and decreasing. So, I look at this, and I look at dental offices, and I say, there's something similar going on in dental offices. And no, we're not eating our patients, but I'm going to kind of show you what I mean when I'm talking about this. So let me just explain this. So this is a dental office. I just picked a random dental office, one of my clients, and but all dental offices are like this. I see this time and time again. I could at random pick any dental office that has plateaued, and it's going to look the exact same. So let me explain this a little bit. So the blue line here represents what this office's field hygiene would be if it had a 100% retention from 6 months prior. So this was an ideal scenario of where it would be if it kept all of its patients from 6 months prior, plus added all of its new patients to that number. The orange line is the actual field hygiene numbers, and then the gray line is how many patients they've lost in that month relative to where they were 6 months before. So you can see here that the ideal scenario, at least relative to where they were 6 months prior, is this blue line. Now, as an office starts to grow and add more patients, and in essence losing fewer patients, as it starts to grow and fill those hygiene appointments, you can see it starts to get to that point where it's at full capacity. And most dental offices, and this is the problem that they only have just barely enough extra capacity to basically have 100% retention and maybe just a couple more patients. But the problem is at this point, because they don't have a vast abundance of availability, they start kicking patients out the door. They can't get new patients in at the same rate that they were getting them in before, because they just don't have any place to put them, or not many places to put them. And then when your hygiene patients start canceling, you have no place to put them either. You can't reschedule them because there's no place to put them. So when they cancel, they basically just get kicked out the door. And what happens is you start kicking patients out the door in greater and greater numbers. And pretty soon, the number of patients that you kick out the door starts to exceed the number of patients that you're bringing in terms of new patients. So you can see this office starts to lose more and more and more patients over the next 6 months. And that keeps this filled hygiene rate below what its ideal should be. Because again, this office is losing patients faster than they're bringing new ones in. Now, eventually, once you lose enough patients, now you're starting to open up capacity because basically you kick patients out the door. Now you've got openings in your schedule. So eventually you start to lose fewer patients because then you can bring in some more new patients and maybe reschedule some of those existing patients. And you get to that point where now you're at full capacity again. You've reached that 100%. But once you get to that 100%, now you can't bring in new patients at the same rate as you did before because you have no place to put them. When patients start canceling, you're kicking them out the door, and eventually you start losing patients at a faster rate than you're bringing them in. And it's just this never-ending cycle of coming up to the peak, reaching your capacity, not adding any more availability, and then losing patients. You can see you're losing patients at a faster rate than you're bringing new ones in. And it's just this never-ending cycle of up and down and up and down. There's a ceiling here that gets reached when you've reached your full capacity and you can't get more patients in, and then you start kicking patients out the door faster than you can bring them in. But then there's also this basement down here that once you've lost enough patients, you open up enough capacity that you can start getting patients in again. But the problem is that this is a very narrow band for most offices. And you just stay within this band for the next 10, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years. And if you remember my last video from last week, you only really have to go about 5.5 years before an office like this starts to become unprofitable. But then if you let this linger for the next 10, 20, or 30 years, that's how you get dental offices like this. All the time I'm looking at offices to purchase, and I see offices for sale for $250,000, $300,000, $400,000, and I think to myself, how did this office ever get here, right? This dentist is probably, in his, late 70s or 80s, and he's trying to sell this, and he really doesn't have much to sell. But if you think about this office 30 years ago, that was actually probably a pretty good office. That office is probably worth, in today's money, $1.52 million. But all that happened was that office just did like this for 30 years, right? So if what I want you to do is basically take whatever you think the value of your office is right now, and then cut it in half, and then cut it in half again. And that's probably what your office is going to be worth in about 30 years. But then also cut it in half again after you pay taxes. So that's probably what you're going to take home after you sell your practice in the next 30 years. And if you're happy with that number, fine. Feel free to plateau for the next 20 or 30 years. But if you're not happy with whatever that number is, then we've got to get to that point where when we start hitting that capacity, that's when, or just before actually, that's when you need to start hiring a new dentist and a new hygienist, or expanding your hours, particularly to evenings and weekends, so that you can increase the number of patients that you can see. So let's get out of this predator-prey cycle for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Let's start expanding our businesses and getting to a point that when you do decide that it's time to retire, that you actually have something that you can sell and live happily ever after. If I have one mission, it's to get you dentists to understand that this 5, 10, 15, 20-year plateau, it's not a good thing. And you're not the predator in this one, you're the prey. So in any case, I hope you enjoyed this video. Again, I'm Dr. Bickling. Here's my contact information, and I'll see you on the next one. I'll talk to you soon. Bye. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more content like it, go to ownitdental.com or click the link above and check out my services. I have dozens of hours of training videos and have negotiated reduced lab fees for all my clients. So if you want to get out of the dental chair and start owning your business, go to ownitdental.com and check out my services, and I'll see you soon.